You are not alone. And now there are two resources that I've put together specifically for your journey. This is your host, Rachel Bernstein. I am an educator and a therapist and a cult specialist. And I am very excited to announce Restart and Restore, a journal for survivors of manipulation, and a companion notebook that I've put together to go with it that has people's stories that they've shared with me that they wanted to share with you, and some wonderful quotes from people whose thoughts I truly admire, and more pages and writing prompts for you to continue with the writing that can help you along your healing journey. This isn't just another blank journal. It's a trauma-informed recovery companion, and it offers psychoeducation on the mechanics of manipulation and control and therapeutic writing prompts to explore your history and your strengths, practical exercises that transform insights into some actionable steps, and the freedom to heal at your own pace. You can do it in the time frame that works for you without any judgment or pressure. Whether you joined the organization or the relationship that was controlling as a teen or as an adult, Restart and Restore provides the structure and, I think, validation needed to process your experiences safely. I'm also excited to share, beyond the journal and its companion notebook, that I'm currently working on a second journal specifically for those born and raised in high control groups or high control family units, as their healing journey often involves different and specialized challenges. Restart and Restore and its companion notebook are available now, and you can find the link in the show notes. Thank you very much. I hope it's helpful to you or to someone you love.
Welcome to IndoctriNation, a weekly conversation series about protecting yourself from systems of control. I'm your host, Rachel Bernstein.
Hi, everyone. Today on the show, we have friend and colleague Carol Murchison back on. Her episodes in the past have been really well regarded, and people have learned quite a lot. She is a very skilled attorney and does so much that is important in our field. When we think about escaping a high control group, we often focus on the emotional and psychological journey. But what happens when survivors want legal recourse? What does the law actually offer? And where does it fall short? Today, I'm welcoming back Carol Murchison, who is a cult law specialist. And now she's also the president of the International Cultic Studies Association, ICSA. She has spent years working at the intersection of coercive control and the legal system, pioneering litigation under the Human Trafficking Act on behalf of survivors and religious organizations and cultic groups. In this conversation, we talk about how coercion is finally being recognized in courtrooms and what survivors need to know when they are pursuing legal action. We'll also discuss the upcoming ICSA conference that's happening soon at the beginning of July 2026. And there are going to be links to the details for the conference in the show notes. Here is Carol now. It is such a pleasure to welcome Carol Murchison back onto the show. You're such a special person and such a special guest. And there are so many people who wrote in after hearing your last episode just about how much they learned about their rights and about what is protected and what has yet to really be protected and should be. And that sometimes, while there are a lot of really wonderful developments legally, there's still a lot of room for improvement and further protections. But it's so nice to have you be someone in this field who understands that on this degree, that and that you care to this degree. And so I would love to welcome you back and have you talk a little bit about who you are, to kind of either introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself to the people who heard you before. Welcome.
Well, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here and delighted that there are people out there who are getting educated on this and that you know, we are, as all of you who are in this media and of course, Rachel, you're in the therapy business as well. We're highlighting this. We're really understanding more about it. So anyway, I did my very first podcast with you. Did you know that?
I didn't
I don't
know.
I don't even know when that was. It might have been 2022 or 2023, and I had just gone to work with a group in London, a law firm in London, on building a practice group which would specialize only in what we called spiritual misconduct. And so we kind of learned then that we were dealing with, to use, I guess, the colloquial word, cults. And then we learned that we were really dealing with coercion. And so it's been really a journey. So I've retired from that job. It's about my 14th retirement. So nobody pays any attention, Rachel, when I when I say that I'm retiring. They're like, yeah,
Mhm.
ho hum,
Uh-huh. Right. Mhm.
um,
That's so funny.
so now I'm still doing some cases, but I've decided that the grind of litigation is a difficult one, and I don't want to carry it anymore. But I still am doing litigation and helping people find lawyers who are willing to do this work, because that's one of the things that we need in order to move the ball forward. We need more legal cases that set precedent and that encourage other lawyers to take these cases. And then I'm devoting some of my time, as you know, to the International Cultic Studies Association, also known as ICSA. And so I'm now president of the board, and that is a very interesting and really wonderful position to be in at this moment in time, I think. I'm a lawyer. That's, I guess I forgot to say that.
Right. You're a lawyer, and I love that, getting pulled back in kind of thought. And I have that happen where I think, okay, I'm not going to speak at this next conference. I just can't afford to go there, and I'm whatever, whatever. Suddenly I find myself speaking at the next conference.
Yes.
Right. Because there is a need, or I have information that I think I would like to be able to help people have. And that's a good venue for it. And it's interesting to see where life takes us, where right where we began and now where we are, and what speaks to our heart over the years. And I'm sure just suddenly being the president of the board of an organization and comparing that, sort of juxtaposing that from the beginning of your legal career and thinking, wow, this was an unexpected turn.
Completely unexpected. If you think about it, and I do from time to time think of exactly that, it is that I had no background in any of this other than being a lawyer until about 2018. And so had been a lawyer in here where I am now in Philadelphia at a big law firm, at a defense law firm. I had been an employment lawyer and had kind of transitioned into doing training on sexual misconduct in the workplace and doing investigations for big companies where somebody would come in and they would say, this person did this terrible thing to me. And for one reason or another, they would want to bring in an outside lawyer to do it rather than within the company itself. So I did a lot of investigations that way over the years. And then in 2018, right after the Harvey Weinstein really is like a, a featured player in my life story, at least as it begins in 2018, because he was really the beginning of the Me Too movement, right? Which was another wave of something that happened in the 90s, which was the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas hearings. That was like sexual harassment in the workplace. Nobody had ever filed a claim. Really? I was practicing in Massachusetts. I think that the Massachusetts or the Commission Against Discrimination hadn't really had only a few harassment claims when Anita Hill came forward. And then the story is that then their telephone system went down from people who were calling and saying, "This happened to me." So I think that the thing that happened with Harvey Weinstein in 2018 was that people were saying, yeah, this happened to me. But the thing that happened was coercion with Harvey. So we don't necessarily think of that way. But when he was sued, it was under the Human Trafficking Act. And when I read that, I thought, well, what was Harvey doing that I missed? Where was the truck?
Right, yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh,
Where
yeah.
was the crossing of the state lines? And I actually had a conversation with the lawyers who brought that initial case, and they were like, no, you don't need that. You don't need that. And I had no idea about cults, about anything like that, but I was terribly interested in that when that happened. Enough interested that I tracked down the lawyers, wrote to them, set up a call, and listened to what they had to say. It was not about crossing state lines, it was about coercion. And because if you remember, Harvey's kind of MO was, if you have this sexual encounter with me, I will put you in touch with a big producer, all of these kinds of things. People were being coerced. Shortly after that, a woman was in touch with me who was saying that she had been sexually abused in a religious organization. And because what I had done in my previous career was I'd been retired all that time. But what I had done was investigations. And so I did an investigation. And that was really the beginning of looking at religious groups that were using coercion to take advantage of people through labor and through sex. And after 4 years of doing that, Rachel, I found that my initial optimism, which was if we just investigate this and bring it to the attention of the people running the organization, they will take care of this. They will want to know about this. This was the kind of naivete from being a corporate lawyer, right? And no one was interested in doing anything about it. So I shifted my seat at the table and I moved to developing a litigation practice. And we used the Human Trafficking Act over and over and over again and continue to use it. And so that's why I say that Harvey really he played a key role in my career, I'm sure unbeknownst to him. And not that he's thinking much about that in prison.
No, no, probably not. He has other things on his mind. But still, yes, I remember hearing Rose McGowan, who came forward, right? And I just remember learning about her because she was raised in the Children of God and a cultic group. And I thought how interesting that, she will know from this about, how people are used, how their bodies are used, how they're made to feel there's no choice. They have to do this. They have to do this or else, or this is what God wants of them, or whatever else, but that they have to shelve any kind of boundary and almost feel like it would be wrong to implement any kind of boundary. And so, then you're fodder for people to take advantage of it. And so I think people who have been in those environments have their antenna up. But it's interesting how after something happens, people will then call in and a whole phone system will crash because I think people don't want to be the firsts. It takes so much bravery. Even with Anita Hill, I think about she kind of answers the question, how come people don't come forward? or they don't come forward more quickly? Well, because of these kinds of cases, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, every once in a while, I think back to Anita Hill and I think, who would ever come forward after seeing that? After seeing Democrats and Republicans excoriate her and her calmness and her presence, inspiration. That is an inspiration. And she really launched something that's so, so, so important to the work that you and I are doing, which is this second wave now, the Me Too wave. Even though it wasn't about cults or coercion, it was about coercion, indeed. But that's not the way it was framed. But the fact is that people paid attention. People, not everybody, but a large number of people believed the survivors. The law believed the survivors. And there was accountability. That's a huge message when it's a famous figure that we're all seeing reported in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the LA Times and all of the newspapers. We're seeing that all the time. And I think it really sends even an unconscious message that it's getting easier. The bar isn't so high now for people to come forward. And I think that that is a lot of what we're seeing today. I think we're seeing the kind of, there's a lot of debate. Is the Me Too movement over? Has it gone too far? I don't get involved in that particularly, but what I do see is that we know that survivors can be believed.
Yeah. I'm sure you come across this, I come across this, that sometimes systems are built in a way that add insult to injury and insult over and over and over, right? That, even within a cultic system or within a controlling environment, you are somehow responsible for everything that happens to you. And you're even responsible for everything that happens that's bad in the world somehow. So you carry that around. And to have someone say, I believe you. I can tell by your symptoms what you've been through, and it's real. It changes everything for people. Like, suddenly, not only do they know there's a system to protect them, but they suddenly, for the first time, get the message they matter and what happened to them matters. And that is huge.
Do you find that in your therapy? That when people come into you and you believe them, that it just, a weight is lifted in some kind of way?
Yeah. It's not like I am snowed by everyone. I can tell sometimes when there is a kind of a paranoid thinking. I'm and not that I'm anyone's judge or jury, but I can kind of tell that the thinking might be disordered. And so that is a different kind of treatment. But yeah, if someone says to me, like, was in a group and we believed that the mothership was coming behind the comet, I go, "Oh, yeah, I know exactly the group in San Diego." Well, that if they then went to a different therapist and said that, they'd probably be told they need medication. Um, so it really, I think it helps to go to people like to you where you say, "Ah, okay,
Yeah.
now I know this
Oh, yeah.
actually does happen."
It is so interesting. Two things on that. I always tell people, in the sense that I tell people I believe you, but my job is to make sure that 12 people sitting in the jury box believe you. And if I don't think that I can persuade them of that, then I can't take your case. Because the worst thing for a person is to go through the rigors of litigation and be defeated by 12 people who don't believe you. So that's the way that I manage it, because I'm not in the therapy business. So I don't have another, kind of like little, thing up my sleeve that I can do. I can either help you by taking your case or I can't. But if I can't take it, it's not because I don't believe you. It's because there isn't enough evidence, or many obstacles under the law. You're outside of the time limit, very short time limits for people to bring these cases, which is a double whammy when we're talking about coercive control, right? Because if you're if you're subjected to what I think of as shaming and blaming, you learn just what you were talking about before, Rachel, which is that everything is my problem. I'm responsible for being not good enough. I'm being shamed. I'm being blamed for everything. And to come out of that to a point where you no longer, you're manifesting something else other than everything is my fault to, wow, this could have been somebody else's fault. That takes a long time, I mean,
Mhm.
because people
Right.
are coming to you and spending a lot of time, I would imagine, trying to shed some of those beliefs that were just simply instilled in people.
Absolutely, and as you're saying that, I'm even thinking about the phrase, to say to someone, "I believe you," and how powerful that is. Sometimes the work is, "But do you believe you?"
Yes.
Because people will go back and say, "Well, but I deserved it," or "It wasn't that bad," or "He really meant well." Or maybe that was a message from God, or because the language has been changed. That's the way they show you they care or they love you. It's not abuse, it's not neglect, it's not anything that has sort of a legal ramification to it, but instead, if the language can be that it's for your benefit, it's what you deserved, it's helped to keep you on the right path, or you've been specially chosen for this, then it's very hard for people to believe themselves and to move forward knowing that really something happened to them that was wrong. It wasn't their fault. It was never their fault. Because as soon as someone crosses a boundary, it's all on them. It's not on you anymore. But that it's not something that, you need to downplay in your head also, because you've also learned, you meaning the people coming out of these situations, they've learned to downplay what they've been through in order to survive. And so you might hear someone say, "Yeah, it was bad, but it wasn't that bad." And then if you ask for details, you're thinking, "Oh, no, that was really bad."
That's exactly right. Some of the clients that we have had to really, well, we always do a psychological assessment. It's a necessity in litigation, but sometimes the psychologist has to actually help people understand how bad it was because the shaming and blaming is so deep. You know, it must be something that I did. The blaming, I think this is interesting that the blaming really leads to, or the shaming leads to silence. Is that your experience? Is that a true
Yeah.
statement, do you think?
Yeah, the shaming leads to silence. The promotion or, the need for secrecy also, of course, leads to just this natural silence about what happened because 'cause you're supposed to never talk about it and tell people about it. Let the world know about what you've been through, so you're used to not talking about it. But yeah, the shame, and I think the system as it is for so many people still, where they will say, "Why did you go to that party, and why were you wearing that?" And they redirect the blame onto you and re-traumatize the person who was worried about being shamed. So what do you do when you're meeting with someone and you can tell that they're holding back because they're almost flinching, like they're waiting to be blamed or to not be believed? How do you handle those kinds of interviews?
Well, so I think that for us, people have come to us because they have had moments where there's been clarity about the harm that's been done. Right? It's not like seeking out a therapist so that you can work through it. There's been some moments of clarity, and for some of our clients, big moments of clarity that say, I was harmed. This was harmful to me. And that's why they're sitting across from me as a lawyer. But yes, there are people who come in and they're able to describe it, but as you suggested, they don't put the weight on it that we might and which we must in litigation. Because most of these cases settle. I think that's one thing that people don't really realize in the civil justice system in the United States, for example. 95%, some statistics say more, of any civil cases, they settle, which means that you're not going to get in front of a jury. And so you're going to have a completely different process, which all of it is a very big learning curve for people who are coming out of cults and these coercive situations. But usually, if the person has time, meaning the federal trafficking statute has a 10-year statute of limitations. Canada, for example, has no statute of limitations on sexual assault, children or adults, which is what we should have, but we don't. So we take 10 years. Some of the states have trafficking acts with longer, even and shorter, but at least we can count on the federal statute to be 10 years. So if I'm 3 years out of a cult and I come to a lawyer like me and I'm thinking, okay, if it's forced labor or it's sex, we may have a case here that we can bring. There's always sexual assault as a case, right? So that could be a 2-year statute of limitations. It could be a 4-year, 6-year, depending on the state. So there are so many variables in this. But the problem with a sexual assault case is that much of what happens under coercion looks like consent.
Wow. Well said. Yeah.
So if we go back to Harvey Weinstein again, if we were just looking at sexual assault, we might be able to win that case. But there's a much higher probability of being successful when coercion is written into the statute.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
You see what I mean? Because if we put
Yeah.
this person up on a stand and we're at a trial, or even if we're in mediation, Harvey Weinstein's lawyers are going to say, as they said, these people consented. These were adult women, well educated. They were out in the world and they consented to this. They had their own motive, even for doing this. It's hard. It's hard. And the case that I will point to that is very recent and that probably everyone knows a little bit about is the P. Diddy case. So, with the P. Diddy case, the victim, the survivor who testified, we don't know this for a fact because we don't know what the jury thought, but they did not convict him, even on the human trafficking charge, because it looked a lot like consent. So we have a lot of options. Some get narrowed because of time, some get narrowed because of the way things look. The most open option often is under the Trafficking Act. And so if a person has 7 more years under the Trafficking Act, we may say, look, take some time, think about this, know that you have a time clock that's ticking, but maybe you need to do more. But oftentimes the fact of making the decision to come to a lawyer is already the proof that the person believes that they've been harmed and they need reassurance of that. And so if a lawyer says, I think that you have a trafficking case, I think you have a sexual assault case, I think you have a forced labor case, whatever the lawyer might say, I think that lands on someone who's already made the decision to be there.
Okay. Right.
And then if we factor in what the kind of business of law is. So being a plaintiff's lawyer, which means representing the person who's been harmed under what is known as a no-win, no-fee agreement, which means if you don't win any money, I don't get any money. It means that when you really dig down in there, that I have to really believe in your case to take it, because I can't afford to make too many mistakes in that direction. And so there's a confidence that comes from that. So now in my current retirement phase, 14, I go to other lawyers who have litigation practices. A lot of people come to me because they hear me on your show or they've met me at the ICSA conferences or whatever. And I say to them, I'm going to go to these people and I'm going to talk with them about taking your case. And what you have to understand is this is a business investment for them. That seems like a crass way to put it, but that is a reality. And that means that they believe enough in you and your harm and their ability to prove your harm that they're willing to invest, depending how long a case goes on, million, more. And so I think that helps people to say, okay, it's not just me. I'm going to, these people are willing to invest time, money, energy, all of those things in this because they not only believe in me, but they believe in the harm.
Right. And so I wonder two things. I had a question, but first I was going to say that sometimes, and you might find this too, especially when people are kind of downplaying what they've been through and they've been told that they're not supposed to be negative, that anytime they share anything, also it's complaining, they're showing weakness, they're divulging secrets. They have all these other ways of, like, they have to jump through all these mental hoops to even feel okay about talking, and they'll sometimes tell their story to me, and, yes, it's bad, but it feels like there's pieces that are kind of missing, and they'll go right to, "But I guess that was because I didn't do something, something," and I'll notice sometimes not in their words, but in their actions that something has occurred, like, I'm in a I can't always tell this with people on Zoom, but, like, in my office here, I'm in a therapy suite, and if another therapist goes into their office, you sometimes hear the door close, and sometimes if they need to close it hard, it'll kind of in a distant way, you hear it slam, but it's not like it's I mean, I'm used to it, but it's not that it's so jarring. There are certain people who will jump as soon as they hear that. Or if I'm on a busy street here, and if you hear screeching brakes because someone is not making it through the light, people will break out into a sweat, and I'm thinking, and only some people. And I make note of the fact that they're having a physiological response to something that's eliciting fear. What is that about? So I'll sometimes ask them, were there times that you were in spaces where doors were closed or things were slammed, or have you ever been in a car accident or something, and it kind of brings things back, but to have that kind of holistic approach where you get to meet the person and you get to see the person and you get to know what they're telling you in all these nonverbal ways is so important too.
And it's so hard for us as lawyers. I have to say that we are not either probably by nature or by training actually, what I would call survivor centered. I had a wonderful young woman from Australia who was on some kind of grant in the United States. And I met up with her in New York for an interview. She wanted to interview me. And she asked me this question: did you in law school have training on dealing with people who have trauma? And I was left like, well, of course, that seems like the most reasonable thing for a law school to teach a bunch of people, 50% of whom are going to deal with people in automobile accidents, in divorces. I mean, the numbers of traumas are uncountable. And yet we've never received any kind of training on how to deal with it. So we are probably not, although I will say that now I do think that more and more lawyers are more survivor oriented and we're picking up on these things. We had training at McAllister Oliverius. We had a woman come in and talk about trauma and talk about vicarious trauma, which is very interesting too, because um, we are, as lawyers, really literally carrying people's stories. And for people who have not been in therapy, we are the only people who are carrying their stories or who have ever carried their stories. Sometimes families have been left behind in the cult or don't even if they've gotten out, they don't want to go back to those memories. And so they don't want to, they don't want to hear about it or process it. And so I think even carrying the stories, we have to be aware of the trauma that brings. You're talking about door slamming and, and the screeching. And when we're talking about litigation, we're also talking about being in a process in which you are going to be challenged. So we're not necessarily going to go to trial, probably, but if we go to a mediation, for example, you're going to be sitting in a room with me and the lawyers on your side, almost always more than one lawyer. They're going to be sitting, the people who harmed you are going to be in that building. They're going to be in another room. They're not going to interact with you, but you could encounter them in the hallway. You could encounter them in the ladies' room. You could encounter them in any place there. It is frightening to people, that encounter. And then if you are in discovery, which is a phase of the litigation where we build the case, you are going to be deposed, which means that you are going to be in a room with your lawyer team and their lawyer team and potentially them, the harmers, the defendants. And that is also frightening. And their lawyers are going to ask you questions which challenge your story. So you can see all of these things that we've been talking about the trauma and the way it plays out makes litigation, and we can't change it. If we could change it, we would change it, but we can't because we're operating within the rules of the system. But I have to say, I have one story that I'll tell you about a woman who was a client of ours who had some pretty severe kind of harm that involved rape and many other kinds of assaults in a cult, in a religion. And her case went into discovery and she was to be deposed. And about a week before the deposition, the lawyers on the other side said, our clients are going to be at the deposition. It was going to be in person. And so we told her, this is, they're going to, these people are going to be there. And it really, really was hard for her. She was so frightened to see them again, even though it had been years. It had been 10 years. That kind of anxiety that arose was overwhelming. And so we try to provide as much support and comfort as we can, knowing that we cannot change the system. We went into the room and she sat down where she needed to be. And they were setting up the room, the court reporter and everything. And the defendants came in the room and they sat at the other end of the table. And then before we got started, we took a little break for everybody to get water and blah, blah, blah. I walked out with her and she said, you know what? I saw them. And at first I was so frightened. But then I saw that they were very small people. They looked completely different to her than they had 10 years before. So there's so much healing that can happen, but people need to be in therapy, Rachel, to process this.
Yeah.
Because the lawyers are not therapists.
Right. No, you have a lot of other things that you're doing.
And we don't have the knowledge. We just really, we try to be well informed about trauma, and we've done a lot of classes and reading and all of that kind of stuff. But people who've been in therapy, they are able to process it real time as it's going along in the litigation process. And when they see those people, they look completely different to them. They looked completely different to her. I've never forgotten that. Like sometimes your parents who are very, very big in your life, and if you haven't seen them for a while, or even if you have, there comes a moment when you look at them and they're small and they're older and they're different than they appeared to you when you were a child. So it's a journey for the folks who are willing to do it. But look at our heroine in France, who, right, was she like an Anita Hill inspiration moment of shame will not, shame must change sides. And that shame was not going to keep her silent. And she endured an enormous amount in that trial and in coming forward. But that's another, it's like another marker that says people will look at that and they'll be able to say, yeah, I need to do that too.
It's right. She's an incredible woman, really incredible. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who told her not to come forward and said, don't allow them to show video and whatever. And she said, no, I didn't create this. This is something that needs to be shown. Really sets a lovely precedent for bravery in that way and justice. I'm remembering working with women who had been in La Luz del Mundo, and they had to face yes, they needed to talk about the abuse and the trafficking and all of it, and it's horrific. The thing they just kept coming back to was, "He's gonna be in the courtroom. How do we handle that moment?" Right? Like, exactly as you're saying. What's interesting is that they really grew up learning that he was a messenger of God. So when they were looking at him, they didn't see him, they saw God. And so they were really afraid that that's the way they would still view him, they're somehow fighting against God. Um, and one of them said to me after one of the court appearances, I looked at him and I noticed that he had a coffee stain or something on his tie.
I
And I
love that.
and I realized he's just a guy, you know?
Yes.
It was so like, if he were God, it'd be perfect, right? He'd show up perfectly
Right.
and right? He
He
wouldn't
would
have a
have an
coffee stain.
aura.
He would have an aura.
Right.
He wouldn't just be this dude who happened to spill coffee on himself. But there's also something really interesting about helping people see that they no longer need to see that person through certain eyes. Like, they're no longer 15, they're no longer 5. They, by and large, are gonna be adults. Some are still gonna be kids in the courtroom, which is not easy, but still they're gonna be older. But I think also being able to look over and see you, knowing that for the first time in their life, they have backup. They have someone on their team. They have a team, period, is just revolutionary and I think very empowering.
The word team really resonates for me because I do think that when we work with a client or clients in a case, we talk about the team because it's always more than one lawyer. There's a paralegal, there are different lawyers, there are 2 or 3 lawyers. And so that sense that there's a force around you, I think helps psychologically. I've really wondered, when I first started doing the litigation, whether it would be more harmful than helpful to survivors. I did. I really thought the system can be so demanding in the sense that, we're telling people we believe you, but we're going to put you in a room with their lawyer and he or she doesn't believe you. And in fact, it's their job to somehow prove that you're lying. And so it's not an easy thing to put people through. But by and large, I have found that that it's a little bit of trial by fire, that having that team that they know we're sitting there in that deposition, we can't do much. We always tell them, we can't stop them from asking questions. That's their right. But every hour or hour and a half, we're going to take a break and we're going to walk you out and then we're going to regroup. It's having a sense that people are supporting you, just as in therapy, perhaps.
Right. Yeah. Yes. because I think people have come from a situation where they felt so alone because they were alone. There was nobody on their side, no one to talk to, no one, really no one. So that is it's so important, it's so necessary. I wonder also to ask you just a very practical legal question here, which is what should people hold on to if they have it or try to collect if they can that would help with their case? I worked with someone who used to keep a journal, and she kept a journal during this horrible relationship she was in. And she had talked to someone in her family after she finally got out, and that week that she came to see me, so this family member said, "Oh, you have to get rid of all of those journals. That's negative energy." The kind of a energy believing family. That's negative energy. You have to put everything behind you, get rid of everything. So she came in to see me the first time, and she told me she was so proud of herself that she had gotten rid of the journals and she had thrown them in the trash outside her house. And my first question was, "What day is your trash collected?" Like, "Do we have some time for you to go home and get
Yeah,
those things
right,
out?"
right.
Right?
Yes, right. Well, so
Yeah.
that's such an interesting question. And it is something that, in fact, plaintiffs who are involved in lawsuits have to struggle with sometimes. So, first of all, my question, in addition to do you have time now to go home before the trash is picked up, is have you already considered litigation? Because if you've already said, I'm going to be involved in litigation, you have an obligation to preserve everything, no matter what it is. So, this is another part of the litigation process that can be difficult for plaintiffs because when you write in a journal, you are not censoring yourself, generally speaking, in terms of what you're writing. And you're writing things that are personal to you, which is why you're writing it in your own personal journal and, not posting it on Facebook. And so, but if those exist at the time that you are considering litigation, then what a lawyer is going to tell you is you have an obligation. You must not destroy anything. You can't take down, you can take it down, but you have to preserve your Facebook page, your Twitter, your Instagram, whatever you've been posting, because those are going to be asked for in discovery. Might that feel like an invasion of privacy? Absolutely. Absolutely. You were thinking of that from a different point of view, right? So, as a therapist, you wanted her to have those.
I wanted her to have those because I've seen way too often that people will downplay their memories, and they don't want to really remember it as awful as it was, because who does? And then they'll sometimes let that person back into their life. So hold on to this evidence and reread it if this person is, making you feel guilty for leaving or trying to convince you that it really wasn't that bad, you can open it up and read how miserable you were and the details of just day to day what your life was like. It helps. It really does help. In fact, interestingly, there's someone I know who was involved in a group where they were told to write in journals, and then they handed them in to the leader who would then correct what they wrote and have them rewrite it. Um, and, that was fascinating. Um, when she actually did sue, she turned them in and she said, "These were all, looked over by and edited by the leader, so they're not, it's not my fault."
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
right, and
Well,
but it
but
was a
that,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No,
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 it's
no.
okay.
I was going to say, it just shows the level of coercion. So, from my perspective, from a lawyer's perspective, I'm like, okay, I'm going to list. I'm actually working here today on a complaint, and I have a whole section called Systems of Coercion. And so I have things like uh, degradation, shaming and blaming, peer surveillance, people reporting on one another, you know, micromanagement of personal life. Here's who you can go out with, here's who you can see, here's what you have to do. All of these become systems of coercion, which is why people can't leave. So, if that appeared in one of my cases, that would be absolutely in the systems of coercion. The things that I write in my personal journal have to be turned in to the leader so that he can correct my experience.
Yeah, right.
That is profound.
Mhm, mhm. Right, right, and I said also, you might wanna look through them and see, did he write directly and to have you, and, he was clever enough to write in pencil, and that she was supposed to erase it, but you can't always erase everything. So you could sometimes see the notes, something like, "How ungrateful are you that you don't realize I was doing this for your benefit, la, la, la." And, with someone who was able to even what did they do? They did like a rubbing of to just get the impression that's made with a pencil on a
Oh,
piece of
yes.
paper and,
Right. You
so
can
there's a lot of
recover that. Yeah, because
yeah,
the
right.
pencil makes an indentation
Uh-huh. Yeah.
in the paper. So even if it's erased, the indent mark may still be there. That's a great example of the kind of coercion that if we look at what the law is looking at, what a jury is looking at, it's almost like, you know, if we use the example of you're ungrateful, how ungrateful are you that you don't see that I'm doing all of this for you? Jurors take that in and standing on its own, it's like, yeah, probably their mother said that to them at one time or another when they were a teenager and complaining about unloading the dishwasher. They need to see from a legal perspective an entire ecosystem of coercion, some of it physical. We'll always hope for some physical if we can, like you're in an isolated remote place and you don't have any way to get out. That's a very strong marker of what, just in my own mind, I think of as tier one coercion, right? That's tier one. Tier two are other things that are more psychological, which we can mix in, like always shaming people, blaming people, surveillance, those kinds of things. One time somebody asked me, well, where's the line? Where's the line where it becomes coercion? And of course, that's in the hands of 12 people. But given that we're not taking that many cases to trial, what it really depends on then is that we have leverage where the other side's lawyer looks at it and says, if we go to trial, we are taking a risk. So if we have enough, then the other side is saying, I probably need to settle this case because I don't want to take it to trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How interesting is that? So there is also something I find fascinating about this whole process that people are trying to understand the legal system while they're also trying to understand what they just went through and having the words for it and understanding something about themselves and emerging in the world sometimes for the first time. And suddenly they find themselves in a courtroom, which is a whole other world, like a, kind of this microcosm within the world. And so I'm sure you need to do a lot of educating and translating for them just about how things work and what their obligation is about how much they need to share because people learn to overshare with someone in a position of authority, right? So all of
Yes.
that. Wow.
Well, when you were saying that about oversharing, I was laughing because that is absolutely the case for some people. It's almost, I wonder sometimes if it's a reaction to having been silenced, where there's, but it is the case in depositions that we do a lot of work with people, not on their answers, but on not answering too much. So the rule of a deposition that I try to give people is this is not a conversation. This is not like Rachel and Carol talking, endlessly on about things. Is this a yes or no answer if you can give it? And then if you have to give more than that, you give a sentence. You do not volunteer anything that you are not asked. And you would be amazed at how difficult that is. I know this because I was deposed as an expert witness. And I thought, oh, Carol, you, you know, hush, zip it after the first answer. It's awfully hard to do because we're used to conversations. But yeah, oversharing is something that sometimes people are, you know, way, 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 way too much.
Right, and so the quote, I don't know, it's attributed to Mark Twain, but I don't know if it originated there, although I love most of his quotes, but just about how, I'm sorry this is so long, I didn't have time to write a shorter.
A shorter
Right.
letter.
Um,
Yes.
that sometimes you just have so much, like you're saying, you have so much to say, and it's so unformed. Like, you don't know how to make it succinct. I think also, while people in these environments have learned to keep secrets from the outside world, they have often been made to feel like they have to share everything with a person in a position of authority, or there'll be some sort of punitive action against them, or they need to justify their innocence. They need to prove their innocence because they're constantly on the witness stand already in life. That's been their experience. So if I don't give every detail and I don't explain why this happened this way and that it wasn't whatever, it has that kind of nervous energy. And unless I fill in all the gaps, I'm going to be seen as guilty, and so I'm sure it's very hard then to just feel secure in giving a very short or even yes or no answer, because where's the rest of the evidence to prove your innocence?
Yes, exactly. And there's an additional layer onto that, which I will add, which is that you don't know always, at least at the beginning of these things, what is important. Like in the law, people will tell me all kinds of things. Like someone emailed me about all of these, a long litany of things that happened to them. Like they made them, they were inhaling cigarette smoke. And I'm like, well, okay, not good, but it's not a legal cause of action. So people don't know what's legal and what isn't. And so consequently, lots and the trauma makes people very I see it mostly when I do intakes, Rachel. So someone has come to me, they don't know me, they talk to me for the first time, they're nervous to begin with, and I will say to them, "Would you like to tell me what happened, or would you like for me to ask you questions?" Because sometimes, as you said, the memory comes off, in a disconnected way. And so sometimes answering specific questions is better. I will often have people who will say, no, I want you to ask me a question. So I'll say, when did you first enter, this organization? And for 59 minutes, without taking a breath, they will just it just an endless stream. And I do think it's related to the trauma, although I think many of us do that for some kind of way out of habit or, whatever. But that kind of absolutely not knowing how to organize what happened is very strong in our trauma survivors. I heard a woman who suggested this. It was a very good visual representation. She said, when you go to the grocery store or you do anything, your memories are being laid down. And she said it's like a conveyor belt. It's like a box comes down on the conveyor belt and it moves along the conveyor belt and it gets consolidated. And that box in the grocery store, and then you came home and you drove, and all of that comes out on the conveyor belt. But when you are in a traumatic situation, the memories do not drop onto the conveyor belt in an organized fashion, and therefore they never get consolidated in an organized way. And so I don't know the science behind that, but I thought that the imagery was extremely helpful to those of us who are doing this work to recognize that this is you mentioned something before that just came into my mind, which is that in another situation, you would say to yourself, this person is like, what? Suffering from something. Well, they are, but it doesn't mean that the thing that they're suffering from isn't true. It means that the memory didn't get consolidated because the brain couldn't do it.
Right. Yes, as you're saying it, that I see myself as the sort of why and how person in someone's life. They're the what. Like, they can tell me what happened, they don't know why and they don't know how. And so I feel like when those pieces are missing, there isn't a way to frame it and to say, now I understand this happened to me because there isn't a because. And so there's just this sort of stream of events.
Yes.
Uh, yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Hmm.
And that they need, that is why, for example, when as lawyers we are talking about a client, we might say, this information is not really processed yet. It really hasn't been processed. Person who's been in therapy for a while, you can tell the difference. Sometimes we don't even have to ask, we just make an assumption because the information is processed. The how, the why, the what, the when, the where, it's all it's been reconnected in some way, right? But for a lot of our victims, and this is why the statutes of limitations are too short, because there isn't time for people to put the memories together in a consolidated way.
That's very true. It's very true. And I think people also who are born and raised in certain groups, they don't even know their systems in place. They don't wouldn't think of hiring an attorney. Well, what is that? There are people out there who could speak for me and protect me, and that's never happened in my life, so I didn't even know that was possible.
Yeah, no,
So,
exactly.
the you
Well,
know
and people who are raised in these isolated organizations also don't have any knowledge of the systems that exist whatsoever. They just are completely, at a loss for that. You know, um, ICSA, I was just talking with Jackie Johnson, who's the executive director, and they're reissuing a book that was given to them, written and given to them a long time ago. It's called Main Street. It's how to do things when you come out, of a cult, of a coercive organization where you are isolated from information. And when you think of people, what we learn over, let's say, 20 years of the beginning of our lives, how to get a driver's license, how to get a social security card, we learn it in little bits of manageable pieces. But people who come out of these coercive organizations that have been shielded and isolated and kept from society at large have no idea. They have to learn it so fast and so, on the fly. And it's frightening. It adds to the level of trauma.
it does, and disorientation and feeling overwhelmed. Feeling different, feeling out of sync with the rest of the world. It's yeah, and I wanna be able to talk about your involvement with ICSA in the upcoming conference. I'm just reminded of and I'm putting together right now a journal. I already have a journal that's a healing journal for people who are involved in manipulative systems, and now there's a second one that's gonna come out in a few months for people born and raised, who are, like, next generation people who haven't been in the world yet and are emerging like little chicks, but as adults. And so how do you do that? And it's reminding me of a chapter in a book that I'm now in the final stages of editing that's going to come out. Well, my publisher says it's going to be out in February 2027, which I'm hoping is the case. That would be exciting. And each chapter is a case that I have worked on. And one of them, it's interesting you're talking about sort of just managing the world. There is someone who is needing to escape something, but was there during all the years that the first cell phones came out and didn't know what a cell phone was. And then like running down a hill into a shop to try to find a payphone and couldn't find a payphone and had saved up coins to use in a payphone. And where was the payphone? And so someone said, "Do you need a phone?" And, they said, "Yeah, I do." And looking for a structure, a box, and they were handed a little piece of metal and and that would fit in their hand. And they said, "What is this?" And I mean, I think the person in this store had no idea how to handle this person who was an adult and didn't know what they were being handed and didn't know how to work it, didn't know it was at the time of flip phones that they have to open it and press things. And then they said, "Where do I pay you for this?" And they said, "No, it's okay. You don't have long-distance fees. It's okay because they had to call. It was not a part of their world because they were sequestered for so long that there were all these inventions they missed. And they said it was hard because they were kind of looked at like they were not capable and they were not smart, but they had really been, on a mountaintop somewhere, behind locked gates. And so they missed the world kept moving forward, and they just weren't a part of it.
Well, and can you imagine? I mean, I have to say that I complain frequently about the speed of technology and the complexity of technology, having been, of course, lived a whole lifetime without a cell phone, and until relatively, recently in my own life, in times of the next 20, 30 years. But now things are moving so quickly, that I think it must be. I mean, there's a whole lot of catching up that people have to do.
Mhm. Right, and all the language that is connected to all of
Oh,
the new,
yes.
like,
Yes.
well,
Yeah.
do you wanna use a cell phone? What's a cell phone? Do you wanna get on the internet? What's the internet?
Well, and
Right.
then if you try to do anything, actually, it becomes even more complicated as you go along. So I'm looking forward to your book, Rachel. I think it's interesting that it's case studies that we can see. Is there a thread? Would I be right in saying there's a thread that runs through all of these cases?
Yeah, so, yeah, there is a thread. What I wanted to be able to highlight, it was that things don't just happen in one form, and that it's not just people who are, wearing saris, living somewhere far away or living communally, and that there is a case with people who dealt with, fraudulent therapists who took over their lives. And, psychic healers, in air quotes, and, a whole variety of tiny little groups that no one's heard of and others that are bigger that people have heard of, and so they're, consulting with their legal department to see if the names of those groups can be used. It's important. So we're all protected, but the through lines are, how do we help undo this process of programming where not only do you need to learn what techniques were used on you, but you need to kind of unlearn the messages you were given about what you think to be true about yourself in a negative sense, what you think to be true about the world in a negative sense, that it's not a horribly scary place. And, yeah, it can be scary sometimes, but there are so many messages that you were given just to keep you there, just to keep you stuck, just to keep you dependent. And a lot of people who I've worked with have said, actually, people are a lot nicer and kinder out here and will offer to help and will ask if I'm okay. That didn't happen once when I was with that partner or with that group. And so it's a softer, gentler existence outside in the world than people have ever been warned it was going to be. But the through line also is that this is about the human condition, that it's about what we're all searching for and what we're hoping for and what we need, and that we are drawn to answers. And sometimes it feels so good to get them that we don't question if they're true.
Yes. Well, that is so interesting. Really. You were saying about the conference, and I was thinking when you were talking that this year we've invited a couple of speakers, kind of like outside of the normal topic range. And one of them is on autonomy.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
so it's, I think that the wonderful thing about ICSA is that it's like a whole ecosystem of people whose thread is coercion in some way. Cults and coercion. It's, academics doing research and people like you are doing therapy and intervention work. And then there are people who are lawyers and the media and all of these people that sometimes we're focused right down here on coercion. And I think this year we're going to lift our heads up a bit and look at how does autonomy. You reminded me of it when you said, we are human beings and we want these connection and but we want answers. And sometimes we are willing to give up autonomy to have somebody
Mhm.
tell us what the answer is.
Yes, absolutely right. And I think it's a really amazing thing with ICSA, with organizations that have these moments that bring people together, because so often I think what keeps people in manipulative systems, in destructive systems or destructive relationships is the connection. That
Yes.
they
Oh, yes.
Right? They don't wanna be
Yes.
unmoored, they don't wanna be flying through the universe by themselves. They need to know that they have people, that they have a community, that they are not alone in the universe, and so there are people who will go back to, again, unhealthy situations or find another unhealthy situation just because it is doing this hard sell, and they're like, "Yes, yes, yes." But it's reminding me of this quote of, "You don't wanna drink poison just because 'cause you're thirsty."
Right. Yes.
Right? So I think it helps satiate the thirst in a healthy way when you have an organization that says, "Come hang out with us, and we care."
Yeah, and nobody there is gonna say, "Why did you join?" or "Why
Right.
didn't you leave?" Because all of us, whether we're talking about lawyers or media or academics or therapists or forensic experts, everybody knows the answer to that. And it isn't what, people think, which was, like you joined because, you somehow were not smart enough to see that this was going to happen, or you didn't leave because you weren't smart enough to see that this was a cult. I mean, nobody at ICSA, in fact, that's the answers to those two questions really are like what anchors everybody together in a way. You know, it's understanding that anybody, when I tell people what I do, a lot of people say, oh, it's just terrible, but that would never happen to me. And so nobody's going to say that because everybody who's doing research or doing cases or therapy or anything else knows that including the connection thing. What we know is that people who have had that connection in that group, who have had the answers given to them and given up autonomy, require an enormous and unfathomable amount of courage to leave. So when we're talking about profiles and courage, we should be looking at some of the people who leave behind. I've seen cults where people have had to leave behind their children because they signed a statement saying that they could not take, if they ever left, talk about coercion, if they ever left, they would have to leave their children. They would not take their children out. So, yeah, I like that. The first conference I went to was in Louisville, and I think you did a Zoom session there that I saw. And I was there doing a presentation on the Human Trafficking Act. And I knew nothing about the organization because somebody in the marketing department had said, go to Louisville and do it. I'm putting in this presentation for you to do, and, go and do it. And I did. And I was just so taken by the interdisciplinary nature of it. And I've come to appreciate it even more after 3 or 4 years of litigation, because what I see is that the law is not going to be the only answer to this. We need that whole interdisciplinary system because I can't do a case, and we've alluded to this in our conversation. I can't do a case if a survivor isn't able to consolidate their memories, if they haven't been in therapy, if they are not able to face the traumas of it. I can't do a case if I don't have legislation like the Trafficking Act that helps me. I can't do it if I don't have a forensic expert who will get up and be able to persuade a jury that coercion is real. And they can't do that if they don't have the academic research behind them. It's like a chain reaction. And there is just something that is like the connection you were talking about, that when you're in with a group of people that you don't have to explain any of this to, right? It's not like when you say to somebody, I was in a cult, and you wonder what they're thinking.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Right, and it's so isolating for people who finally tell their story, and they have the person listening feel that they're supposed to be somehow superior and say, "Oh, I would have known." That kind of posturing that, you're talking about. It's also true for the families, for the people who are so alienated. Well, what did you do wrong in your parenting that made your child susceptible to the what? That no, I mean, you're dealing with control and influence being something that has been over the years sort of scientifically structured, and it is what I call a well-oiled machine. And you don't realize you're stepping into it, and you are getting turned around and squashed and moved into every, kind of pretzel-like shape. And, that they'll hide it from you that this is what's happening, and they'll tell you you're now more free. You have more autonomy than ever before while they're slowly taking it away. It just means, again, that we're human. It answers sort of our existential questions, about life, about death, about freedom, about all the hot ticket items, right? But I think it pierces isolation, and it says so much to me about our need for social systems, that there needs to be neighborhoods and people who know you and people who care, but people really are more isolated now, and I think because of the internet are more isolated, and they're in their living rooms or their basements or whatever on their screen, and they're not necessarily connecting, and so if someone says, "Hey, come join us," well, that seems like
Yes,
a really lovely
it's
invitation.
it is. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard the old saying, nobody joins a cult. When you walk in, they're not saying, okay, so let me tell you now how this is going to go. They're not going, right? They're not going to tell you now you are going to, give over everything. And then, pretty soon after 25 years of working for us, which is what many are doing, you are going to have nothing. You are going to have nothing. They're not telling you that. So I think absolutely the issue of connection is a big one, and why we have such what feels like a resurgence of cults. That's the kind of the negative thing, I think. But I also think that we're having a moment of understanding of coercion that we haven't encountered before. I think we're seeing trials that are based on coercion. I think we're seeing more discussion. I told someone the other day, M. Gesson, who writes for the New York Times, had an opinion piece on the coercion is a problem in America, and it had to do with authoritarianism and domestic violence. So we're seeing more legislation about domestic violence and coercion. And that's really positive in the sense that now all we need to do is to scale it out beyond the cult of one, which is the domestic violence situation, the Harvey Weinstein, the cult of one, the therapist situation, the cult of one. We can scale out that understanding and knowledge, the academic research, all of the work that people who are involved in ICSA have been doing for decades. I think we can begin to scale it out now.
Mm,
That's an
incredible.
optimistic hope, perhaps, Rachel.
But I love it, and I think people are wanting to learn more, wanting to know more. There's more coverage now about cults and about control and manipulation, and there isn't the same level of shame in connection with it that keeps people silent. Because I think, like, early on in this work that I did, not only were people trying to come out with their story, but they would still need to tell people that there is this thing called a cult and that it really does exist. Like, there was so much you had to teach and help people try to believe, just so then on top of that foundation, you could maybe then tell your own story. It was too much work.
Well, it is, and it's the thing that we say all the time about, for example, racism. Is it's not up to Black people to educate us.
Right,
It's
right.
not up to cult survivors to educate us.
Exactly.
That's why we need media. That's why that is those of you like you, Rachel, are doing podcasts. This is what is helping people to understand the complexity of these issues and not have to be taught that in every conversation. It's not cult survivors' responsibility to have to teach us. We need to try to, push this out into society. And, big job. But, we have, with ICSA at least, there's that wonderful ecosystem. And what I find finally about it is that don't you get energy from having other people who are in it in maybe a different seat at the table, but doing the same kind of work? I so much enjoy hearing the academics and the media people and the survivors' families and the therapists and all of the presentations that just hearten us that there are good people here doing good work.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So if people are interested in looking into it, we're making sure that this episode comes out before the next conference that's going to be in San Diego starting July 1st.
July 1st,
And
right around the corner.
Yep. And then there'll be yearly conferences, but also just to check out the organization and get some of their reading material and check out their website and the resources they have there and the articles and connect with people who you think could be beneficial to you or who have had similar experiences. So I'm very excited for the organization that they have you
Thank you.
with all of your care about this and all of your knowledge and the legal know-how, which brings so much to the table. And you're wonderful, and it's always great to talk to you.
Well, Rachel, we are able to discuss just about anything during our times together.
Yeah,
So
right.
we'll give it a little bit of time and then we'll be back and we'll talk about some new thing.
Perfect. I can't wait.
Yes, me too. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. One more thing before you go. Thank you so much to Carol. It is always so nice to talk to her, and I look forward to seeing her at the upcoming conference and anytime in the future that we have a chance to hang out. She is very smart and very devoted to helping people who are in precarious situations and situations where sometimes it's hard to come forward unless you have a person who really understands what you've been through and what you need. There is something so interesting about one of the topics that she talked about and just mentioned briefly, and I wanted to expand on it a little more. And it's called vicarious trauma. Vicarious trauma is something where a trauma might not have happened to you specifically or directly, but you witnessed it, you heard about it, or you heard it. You were kept from being able to protect someone from something. You enabled some kind of trauma to happen to someone else, someone you care about. It is where it happens just a step removed from you, but still impacts you. And so it's like when we talk about people being bullied. Yes, a bully might go after their victim, and that victim will be victimized and traumatized. But the people who are observing it and not being able to stop it, who are scared they're going to be next, who are really frightened by the amount of viciousness maybe that the bully has against the victim, they're going to have trouble sleeping that night. They're going to have trouble feeling safe walking alone on that playground or in that park. It's something that can stay with you from a young age and also as an adult. When you see things happen, when you hear about things happening, there's sometimes so much that's happening in the world that people need to turn off the TV, the radio, shut down social media, because you can have vicarious trauma through hearing about things happening that are disturbing, that are beyond your capacity to handle them, beyond what your nervous system can take on in that moment. And so it is something that's not given, I think, as much focus and attention as it should. It also shows that when there is some kind of trauma, when there is something that happens that is extreme, that's disturbing, that's upsetting, that's destructive, it has an exponential impact, kind of radiates out. And it's something that then impacts a lot of people around the victim. There's something else that Carol talked about that is really important to know, and this actually can tie in with vicarious trauma. There's some people who say that they didn't step in to help, to protect, to even call the police because they didn't know the person they were caring about or their loved one was actually being abused or was being neglected or was dealing with some kind of emotional recurring trauma because they seemed okay, because they seemed fine. And when people are in cultic systems or when people are with people who are controlling them, maybe kind of in a malignant, awful way, they learn that often there is punishment for revealing how miserable they are, or how miserable the situation is, or how awful the partner is, or how awful the group is. So they learn to pretend. They learn to seem fine on the outside. It's hard sometimes for those people themselves to reconcile that because how do they now tell people that they've been miserable for all this time when they seemed fine for all this time? And how do they actually come clean and open up when they've been made to feel that something bad is going to happen to them if they open up about the reality of their life? But a lot of people would say, I had no idea how miserable you were. Can't believe when I came over to your house and everything seemed okay, maybe a little tense, but seemed okay. I should have rescued you. I should have rescued your children. I should have done more, which can sometimes feel like a vicarious trauma for others who were so close to being able to help, but left without helping, left without rescuing, not knowing that that was needed. And the residual guilt that a lot of people feel for not doing more sometimes can feel like a heavy burden. These kinds of situations are difficult for so many people, and the toxicity of it is something that poisons everyone around. Not the person who is doing it, where it's originating from. They seem unaffected by how poisonous they are because they're just pouring it onto other people. But I think you need to be able to know if you are the person who felt like you could do more, that you actually, just by virtue of being there, maybe showing up, being in touch, even if you didn't exactly know how awful it was, you let the person in that situation know that they still have people out there who care about them, who want to stay in contact, who they can potentially go to if they're feeling open enough or brave enough, or they just suddenly have the ability to escape. And so when so many people are impacted in a negative way by a system that is run in such a destructive way, it just shows you how sick it all is and how much it leaves so many people reeling from the experience. Again, not the leader, not the controller, but everyone else. And so it's good to know when you reach out to be able to get support that you can get support even if it didn't happen to you. You can say, I feel somehow responsible because I didn't know to do something more, or I didn't know to call the police. That's worthy of you getting support for, because you're left wondering if you kind of made a situation continue for longer because of your inaction. I don't want you to put that on yourself if you can help it. But know that if this is a thought, if this is a heaviness that is staying with you, it's worthy of you talking it through with a professional. Take good care, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you again to Carol for coming back to talk to us and for all that she does.
Thank you very much for listening. Please support IndoctriNation on Patreon at patreon.com/indoctrination. Be sure to give us a follow on our social media. Find us on Facebook and Instagram using @IndoctriNation Podcast. And for Twitter, find us at @_indoctrination. We love hearing from you too. So send us an email at indoctrinationshow@gmail.com. And for more updates on the show, visit our website at www.podpage.com/indoctrination.
Are you healing from manipulation, narcissistic abuse, or coercive control? I created something for you. It's called the Restore Journal app. Built from my decades of experience helping survivors recover, this trauma-informed app is more than journaling. It's a guided healing space to help you process what happened, reconnect with your voice, rebuild self-trust, and create healthier boundaries for the future. You can move at your own pace through all of the sections, and it's a multimedia healing support designed for different learning styles and needs. There are 3 tiers, including one that offers you full access to my video and audio library. If you're ready to feel understood, supported, and move forward with more clarity and strength, the link for the app is in the show notes. Take good care.